The afternoon sun hung low over Akron, casting long shadows across the worn streets of the neighborhood. LeBron James stepped out of his black SUV and onto the cracked pavement, sneakers crunching against loose gravel. It had been years since he last walked these streets, but nothing, time, success, or fame, could erase the familiarity etched into his bones. Children's laughter drifted down the street as they played a game of pick-up basketball on a hoop cobbled together with a wooden backboard and frayed netting. It reminded him of his childhood, the hours he'd spent on courts like this, dreaming of a better life. Back then, these streets were his world, and the people in this community had been his family. He owed them everything. He turned toward the wall, a mural stretching across the side of an old brick building, its paint weathered but still vibrant. The artwork depicted the life of the community, a collage of faces, scenes of neighborhood pride, and bold words declaring, "Akron Strong." At its center was a towering depiction of the wall itself, surrounded by figures of hope and resilience. LeBron reached out and ran his hand along the rough surface, a smile playing on his lips. His fingers traced the painted image of a basketball court that had been his sanctuary during hard times. "Still standing," he murmured to himself, but there was a hint of sadness in his voice. The buildings around him told a different story. Across the street, Mrs. Thompson's corner store sat boarded up, its once bustling facade now sagging with disrepair. "She used to let me grab candy on credit," he thought, chuckling at the memory. Further down, the Johnsons' old barber shop had been replaced by a for sale sign. The heart of the community was fading, bit by bit, building by building. "LeBron?" A voice broke his thoughts. He turned to see Marcus, one of the neighborhood elders, walking toward him. Marcus looked the same as ever, broad shoulders, silver-streaked hair, and a perpetual look of determination. "Marcus!" LeBron called out, his face lighting up. The two embraced warmly, and for a moment, it was as if no time had passed. "Didn't think we'd see you back here," Marcus said, his voice gruff but kind. "You've done well for yourself, son." "I wouldn't have done anything without this place," LeBron replied. "Without you all." Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "Well, it's still here. For now." LeBron frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus sighed, gesturing toward a group of men in suits standing near the end of the block. "Developers. They've been sniffing around for weeks. Heard they're planning to buy out the whole area, turn it into some commercial district. They say it's progress, but what it really means is pushing us out." LeBron followed Marcus's gaze. The men were scribbling notes on clipboards, pointing at houses as though they were just items on a checklist. His jaw tightened. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," Marcus said. "The notices went out a few days ago. They're offering pennies on the dollar for these homes. And if people don't sell, they'll use the law to take him anyway." The weight of Marcus's words settled on LeBron. This neighborhood, this wall, was more than just bricks and paint. It was a sanctuary, a testament to everything the community had endured and overcome. Losing it wasn't just about losing homes, it was about losing their history, their identity. LeBron looked back at the wall, the faces painted there staring back at him as if waiting for him to act. He remembered his mother's sacrifices, the neighbors who had watched out for him when times were tough. This place had been his foundation, and now it was crumbling under the weight of greed. A voice called out from behind. "LeBron, is that you?" He turned to see a group of kids, basketballs tucked under their arms, eyes wide with awe. "It's him," one whispered. They approached cautiously, their excitement tempered by disbelief. "Y'all playing ball over there?" LeBron asked, pointing to the makeshift court. The kids nodded enthusiastically. "Let's see what you got." For the next hour, he played with them, laughter and cheers echoing through the street. Neighbors peeked out from windows, some coming outside to watch, their faces lighting up at the sight of their hometown hero. As the game wound down and the kids huddled around him, asking for tips and photos, LeBron's resolve hardened. This wasn't just a visit. He couldn't stand by and watch the place that had shaped him disappear. Before he left, he stood before the wall again, now surrounded by people from the neighborhood. They chatted and laughed, but an undercurrent of unease lingered. LeBron placed a hand on the mural one last time. "This wall isn't coming down," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Not while I'm here." The sun dipped lower, casting the mural in shadow, but the resolve in his voice left no room for doubt. Change was coming, one way or another. The smell of burnt coffee and anxiety filled the cramped community center. Chairs scraped against the scuffed wooden floor as residents shuffled into the makeshift town hall, clutching crumpled notices and wearing expressions of quiet desperation. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting a pale glow on faces weathered by years of hardship. At the front of the room, a thin man in a suit adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. His name was Paul Hensley, a city official sent to deliver what he called updates about the neighborhood's future. He scanned the room, his unease barely concealed behind a strained smile. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm here to provide clarity on the redevelopment plans and address any concerns you may have." A murmur swept through the room like an approaching storm. From the back, Mrs. Jenkins, a retired schoolteacher with a fiery temper, stood up. "What's there to clarify?" she snapped, waving the eviction notice in the air. "You're telling us we're losing our homes. How do you explain that?" Hensley adjusted his tie, visibly flustered. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration. But this project is meant to bring progress to Akron. New businesses, jobs, opportunities for growth." "Opportunities for who?" Marcus interjected, standing next to Mrs. Jenkins. His voice boomed with authority, silencing the crowd. "Not for us, that's for sure. You're offering peanuts for our homes, and even if we take it, where are we supposed to go? This isn't progress. It's displacement." The murmurs grew louder, anger rising like a tide. Residents chimed in, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of outrage. "We've lived here our whole lives. This is all we have. They can't just take it from us." Hensley raised his hands in an attempt to calm the crowd. "Please, everyone, let's keep this civil. The city has partnered with developers to ensure fair compensation and relocation assistance." "Fair compensation?" Mrs. Jenkins spat. "I'd like to see you try to find a new home with what you're offering. It's insulting." Amid the commotion, the doors to the hall creaked open, and a tall figure stepped inside. Heads turned, and a collective gasp rippled through the room as LeBron James walked in, his presence commanding immediate attention. The noise subsided into a stunned silence. LeBron scanned the room, his gaze settling on familiar faces, friends, mentors, neighbors who had once been his lifeline. He saw fear, anger, and a flicker of hope as they looked to him for answers. Slowly, he moved to the front, stopping beside Marcus and Mrs. Jenkins. "Mr. Hensley," LeBron began, his voice steady but firm. "I grew up in this neighborhood. These streets, these people, they're not just a community. They're a family. And you're telling them they have to leave their home for some progress they'll never see the benefits of?" Hensley faltered under LeBron's piercing gaze. "Mr. James, I appreciate your concern, but this project is—" LeBron cut him off. "This project is taking away the heart of this neighborhood. You think you can slap a dollar sign on everything and call it progress? These people aren't just statistics. They're real. Their lives matter." The crowd erupted into applause, their earlier frustration now channeled into a sense of unity. LeBron turned to face them, his voice rising with conviction. "We're not just going to sit back and let them take what's ours. We've fought too hard, for too long, to give up now." Hensley shifted uncomfortably, the power dynamic in the room shifting with every word LeBron spoke. "Mr. James, I urge you to consider the broader picture. This development could bring long-term benefits to Akron. And what about the short-term destruction?" LeBron shot back. "What happens to these families when their homes are gone? Where's the plan for that?" Hensley opened his mouth but had no response. The silence that followed was deafening. LeBron turned back to the crowd. "This isn't just about buildings or businesses. It's about people. And if we stand together, they can't ignore us. They can't bulldoze over our voices. The room erupted into cheers, the energy palpable. LeBron raised his hand to quiet them. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We're going to organize. We're going to fight. And we're going to make them listen." As the meeting adjourned, the residents left with renewed determination, their fear replaced by resolve. Marcus clapped a hand on LeBron's shoulder as they stood outside the hall, the cold air biting against their skin. "You sure about this, kid?" Marcus asked, his tone cautious but hopeful. LeBron looked toward the wall in the distance, its colors barely visible under the dim streetlights. "I'm sure," he said, his voice unwavering. "We're not losing this fight. Not while I'm here." The first drops of rain began to fall, but no one moved to seek shelter. A storm was brewing, and this time, they were ready to face it head-on. The press conference was held in a sleek, modern building downtown, far removed from the crumbling facades of the Akron neighborhood. Rows of journalists sat under bright stage lights, their laptops and cameras trained on a long table where city officials and real estate executives sat with practiced smiles. Paul Hensley, the same beleaguered official from the community meeting, cleared his throat into the microphone. His voice, now more rehearsed than apologetic, filled the room. "Thank you all for coming today. We are excited to announce the Akron Renaissance Project, a bold step toward economic revitalization and growth for our great city." He gestured to the screen behind him, which lit up with sleek renderings of modern skyscrapers, bustling storefronts, and neatly manicured parks. The images were a stark contrast to the reality of the neighborhood they sought to erase. "This project will bring thousands of jobs, attract businesses, and position Akron as a hub for innovation." Next to him, a sharply dressed woman leaned into her microphone. Samantha Vaughn, the lead developer for the project, exuded the polished confidence of someone used to getting what she wanted. "This development represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity," she said, her tone smooth and measured. "We are offering generous compensation packages to residents and comprehensive relocation assistance. This is not just about buildings, it's about creating a better future for Akron." The room buzzed with murmurs as reporters scribbled notes and raised their hands for questions. But before anyone could speak, the back doors swung open, and in walked LeBron James. His arrival sent a wave of energy through the room, cameras swiveling toward him, flashbulbs popping. Uninvited but undeterred, LeBron strode to the front of the room, his presence commanding attention. Vaughn and Hensley exchanged uneasy glances, their polished demeanor faltering under the weight of his reputation. "Mr. James," Hensley began, his voice tight. "This is a closed press conference." LeBron ignored him and addressed the room, his deep voice carrying over the hum of whispers. "I'm here because this Renaissance project isn't what it seems. You're selling a vision of progress, but at what cost? The people in that neighborhood aren't just numbers on a ledger. They're families. They're my people." A reporter raised a hand. "LeBron, are you saying you oppose the project entirely?" "I'm saying I oppose the way it's being done," he replied firmly. "You can't call it progress when it comes at the expense of displacing an entire community. Those families built that neighborhood. They've endured hardship after hardship, and now they're being pushed aside like they don't matter." Vaughn leaned forward, her practiced smile thinning. "Mr. James, we understand your passion for your community, but this project will benefit the entire city. The economic growth it brings will lift everyone." "Will it?" LeBron shot back. "Or will it only benefit the people in this room, the ones with suits and spreadsheets? What happens to the families who can't afford to move? What happens to the single mothers, the elders, the kids? Where's your plan for them?" The room fell silent. Vaughn's polished facade cracked slightly as she fumbled for a response. "We're offering compensation that exceeds market value." "Market value doesn't mean anything when you're asking people to give up their home, their roots," LeBron interrupted. "You think you can replace a lifetime of memories with a check? That's not just wrong, it's cruel." Reporters' pens scratched furiously against notepads, their cameras capturing every heated exchange. The balance of the room had shifted, and Vaughn knew it. She turned to Hensley, her voice sharp. "Paul, perhaps you'd like to address Mr. James's concerns." Hensley looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else, but he adjusted his glasses and attempted to regain control. Mr. James, we are taking every step to ensure this process is fair. This project is about creating opportunity. For who? LeBron demanded, his voice rising. Because it sure isn't for the people you're kicking out. If you really cared about opportunity, you'd find a way to develop with the community, not against it. Applause broke out from the back of the room, where a few residents of the neighborhood had quietly slipped in to watch the conference. Encouraged, LeBron turned to the reporters. This isn't just a fight for one neighborhood. It's a fight for justice, for fairness, for doing what's right. I won't let them bulldoze over these people's lives without a fight. The tension in the room was palpable. Vaughn leaned back in her chair, her composure fraying, while Hensley looked down, avoiding the cameras entirely. The glossy renderings on the screen behind them now seemed hollow, a facade for greed dressed up as progress. LeBron took a final step forward, his voice steady and clear. Akron deserves better than this. And if you think you can silence these voices, you're wrong. This isn't over. He turned and left the room, the sound of cameras clicking and reporters shouting questions following him out the door. Outside, a small group of neighborhood residents waited, their faces a mix of gratitude and hope. Marcus stepped forward, clapping a hand on LeBron's shoulder. You're making them listen, kid, Marcus said. LeBron nodded, his jaw set with determination. We're just getting started. The storm was no longer brewing, it was here. The sun dipped low over Akron as a crowd gathered at the heart of the neighborhood, in front of the wall. It stood tall and defiant, its vibrant colors glowing in the golden hour light. Beneath it, the community was assembling, a patchwork of families, elders, children, and a few curious onlookers. Card tables held petitions, signs were painted with bold slogans, and voices buzzed with determination. LeBron stood near the center, his imposing frame impossible to miss. He wore no jersey or suit, just a plain hoodie and jeans, blending into the crowd. But his presence carried weight, his name drawing cameras, reporters, and attention from every corner of the city. Tonight, it wasn't about fame, it was about fighting for the soul of the neighborhood. The microphone crackled as Marcus stepped up to speak. His deep, steady voice cut through the noise. We're here because this is more than just a neighborhood, he began, his words slow and deliberate. This is our home. This is where we raised our kids, cared for each other, and built lives out of nothing. Applause rippled through the crowd, a wave of solidarity washing over them. Marcus gestured toward the wall. This isn't just a mural. It's a testament to who we are, our struggles, our victories, our stories. And we're not about to let anyone tear it down. The crowd roared in agreement, the sound echoing through the streets. A young woman stepped forward next, her hand clutching the microphone with a mix of nervousness and resolve. Her name was Maria, a single mother who had grown up here and was now raising her own son in the same small apartment. My son asks me every day if we're going to lose our home, Maria said, her voice trembling. He's 6 years old. He doesn't understand why someone wants to take away the place where he feels safe, where he belongs. And honestly, I don't either. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice grew stronger. But I do know this, we're not alone. Look around you. We've always had each other, and we're going to keep fighting, no matter what they throw at us. The crowd erupted into cheers, many shouting Maria's name in encouragement. LeBron felt a lump rise in his throat as he watched her speak. She wasn't just standing up for herself, she was standing up for everyone here. The evening wore on as more residents shared their stories. An elderly couple spoke about the decades they had spent in their modest home, where they had raised 3 generations. A teenage boy talked about how the community basketball court kept him out of trouble and gave him hope for a future beyond the streets. Each voice added another layer to the tapestry of the neighborhood, painting a picture too vivid to ignore. LeBron finally stepped up to the microphone, the energy in the crowd reaching a fever pitch. He took a deep breath, scanning the sea of faces before him. These were the people who had cheered him on as a kid, who had believed in him before the world even knew his name. Now, it was his turn to stand for them. I grew up right here, he began, his voice steady. On these streets. At that court. Under this wall. Everything I've done, everything I've achieved started here. And I'll be damned if I let anyone take this away from us. The crowd roared in agreement, their cheers drowning out the faint hum of distant traffic. LeBron raised his hand to quiet them, his expression resolute. They think we're just a bunch of voices they can ignore. They think they can throw money at the problem and make us disappear. But we're not going anywhere. He pointed toward the petition table. Sign your name. Make your voice heard. Share your story. Because when we stand together, we're stronger than anything they can throw at us. As people began lining up to add their names to the growing petition, LeBron stepped back, watching the community rally around one another. For a moment, he allowed himself to hope. But his optimism was short-lived. A low rumble of engines broke the air, and heads turned toward the end of the block. A convoy of trucks rolled into view, each carrying bulldozers and heavy machinery. A few men in hard hats and vests stood nearby, their postures indifferent as they watched the crowd. Looks like they're trying to send a message, Marcus muttered, coming to stand beside LeBron. LeBron's jaw tightened. So are we. He turned back to the crowd and raised his voice over the commotion. They think this is over, but it's not. They can bring their machines, their lawyers, their money. We're not backing down. The crowd surged forward, forming a human barrier at the edge of the street. Men and women stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces set with determination. Children clung to their parents, and elders linked arms, defying the approaching machines. The tension was electric, the line between resistance and escalation razor-thin. But no one moved. No one faltered. LeBron stood at the front, the wall at his back, the voices of the neighborhood rising in unison behind him. This is our home, he said, loud enough for the men with the trucks to hear. And we're not leaving. The bulldozers rumbled, but they didn't advance. For now, the standoff held, the voices of the community echoing into the night, growing stronger with each passing moment. The morning air was thick with tension as the sun crept over Akron's skyline. On one side of the street, rows of community members stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a human barrier in front of the wall. Their faces were a mixture of fear and defiance, their hands gripping signs that read, "Our homes, our lives," and "Progress without displacement." On the other side, heavy machinery loomed like an invading army. Bulldozers idled, their engines rumbling ominously. Workers in hard hats stood nearby, accompanied by a handful of city officials and security personnel. Paul Hensley, who looked increasingly out of place in his rumpled suit, shifted nervously as he scanned the standoff. The lead developer, Samantha Vaughn, was also present, her lips pressed into a thin line as she reviewed papers on a clipboard. LeBron stood at the forefront of the community line, his broad shoulders squared, his expression unyielding. Beside him were Marcus, Maria, and a group of residents who had become the faces of the movement. The wall loomed behind them, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to the cold, gray machinery. A city official with a megaphone stepped forward. His voice cracked through the morning stillness like a hammer against glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is an authorized development zone. We ask that you clear the area immediately to avoid further action." No one moved. The crowd held their ground, their silence more powerful than any words. LeBron stepped forward, his voice cutting through the official's announcement. "This isn't just a development zone," he said, his tone steady but resolute. "This is our home. You're not just tearing down buildings, you're tearing apart lives. And we're not moving." The official hesitated, lowering the megaphone. Vaughn stepped in, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as she approached. "Mr. James, I understand your passion, but you're putting these people in a dangerous position. This is a legal project. We have the permits, and we're within our rights." "Within your rights?" LeBron countered, his voice rising. "What about the rights of these families? The single mothers? The elders? You can't just erase them because it's convenient for your bottom line." Vaughn's eyes narrowed. "We've offered compensation, more than fair." Maria stepped forward, her voice trembling but loud. Fair? You think uprooting our lives is fair? You think throwing us out and telling us to fend for ourselves is fair? This isn't about money. It's about dignity. The crowd erupted in agreement, their voices swelling into chants. Save our homes! Save our homes! The sound reverberated through the street, a powerful wave of resistance. The city officials stepped back, muttering something to Vaughn. She glanced toward the bulldozers, then turned back to LeBron. You're only delaying the inevitable. This project is going to happen, whether you like it or not. LeBron didn't flinch. Maybe. But not today. The standoff dragged on, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Minutes felt like hours as both sides held their ground. Security personnel shifted uneasily, unsure of how to proceed. The workers near the machinery exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, one of the security guards took a step forward, speaking into a radio. The sound of movement made the crowd tense, but LeBron raised a hand, signaling them to stay calm. You think you can scare us? Marcus shouted. We've faced worse than this. The crowd roared in agreement, their chants growing louder. Vaughn, clearly frustrated, barked orders into her phone, but nothing changed. The bulldozers remained still, their operators unwilling to advance. Then, out of the crowd, a young boy holding his mother's hand stepped forward. He held a sign he had made himself, its letters uneven but bold. Don't take my home. The sight of the child standing at the front of the line struck a chord. Even the workers, many of whom were locals themselves, seemed hesitant. Vaughn's facade cracked for a moment, her eyes flickering toward the boy. She looked back at LeBron, her frustration giving way to exasperation. This isn't going to end well for anyone. It can end well, LeBron said, his voice calm but firm. If you're willing to listen. To compromise. Work with us, not against us. The crowd quieted, their chants replaced by an expectant silence. Vaughn stared at him for a long moment, the weight of the decision visible on her face. Finally, she turned to Hensley and muttered something under her breath. He nodded and raised his megaphone again. The development project is suspended for now, he announced reluctantly. Further negotiations will be scheduled. A collective cheer erupted from the crowd, a wave of relief washing over them. LeBron turned to face his neighbors, a small smile breaking through his otherwise serious expression. They had won this battle, but he knew the war wasn't over. As the machinery began to retreat, Vaughn shot LeBron a look, half irritation, half respect. You've bought yourself some time, she said quietly. But don't think this is over. It's not, LeBron replied. But maybe now, we can start talking about solutions. The line of residents began to dissolve, but the sense of unity remained strong. They had drawn their line in the sand, and for now, it held firm. LeBron looked back at the wall, its colors as vibrant as ever in the morning light. It wasn't just a mural, it was a promise. They weren't backing down. The conference room in City Hall was a far cry from the streets of Akron's embattled neighborhood. The fluorescent lights were harsh, and the sterile white walls reflected the tension in the air. Around the long table sat the key players, city officials, corporate representatives, legal advisors, and LeBron James, flanked by a small group of community leaders, including Marcus and Maria. The stakes were clear. This wasn't just a negotiation, it was a battle for the soul of the neighborhood. The hum of muted conversations died down as Samantha Vaughn entered the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She set her briefcase on the table and took a seat, her expression a mixture of determination and calculated restraint. Paul Hensley cleared his throat, his voice hesitant as he began. Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss potential adjustments to the Akron Renaissance Project and explore solutions that address the concerns of the impacted community. LeBron leaned forward, his broad frame almost eclipsing the microphone in front of him. Let's get one thing straight, he said, his tone firm but measured. We're not here to discuss adjustments. We're here to make sure this project doesn't destroy the community it's claiming to help. Vaughn raised an eyebrow, flipping open her notebook. Mr. James, while I respect your passion, the reality is that this development has already been approved. We've followed every legal protocol. The question isn't whether the project moves forward, it's how. LeBron met her gaze without flinching. Then let's talk about how you move forward without displacing hundreds of families. Marcus chimed in, his voice a steady counterpoint to the tension. We've lived in that neighborhood our whole lives. You talk about economic growth, but it's not growth if it leaves people behind. You've got to include us in the plan, not shove us out of it. Maria nodded, speaking up for the first time. We're not saying no to progress. We're saying no to progress that comes at the expense of everything we've built. Vaughn leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the table. Fine. Let's hear your proposal. LeBron glanced at Marcus, who nodded. Together, they laid out their vision, a community revitalization project that would incorporate development without displacement. It included a commitment to preserving affordable housing within the neighborhood, a community trust fund, seeded by corporate contributions, to support small businesses and local infrastructure, a partnership with local organizations to provide job training and employment opportunities for residents. The wall itself to be protected as a historical and cultural landmark, serving as a centerpiece for the neighborhood's identity. Vaughn listened, her pen hovering over her notepad as she jotted down key points. This is ambitious, she admitted after a pause. It's also expensive. And so is wiping out an entire community, LeBron countered. You've got the resources. This is about priorities. Hensley shifted in his seat. We'd need guarantees. Funding, long-term sustainability. It's not something we can agree to on the spot. That's where I come in, LeBron said, his voice steady. I'm not just here to talk. I'm here to commit. I'll contribute funding from my foundation to kickstart the trust. And I'll use my platform to bring in additional partners. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone. Vaughn studied him for a long moment, her usual sharp demeanor softening just slightly. You're serious about this? As serious as I've ever been, LeBron replied. This isn't just business for me. It's personal. The negotiations continued for hours, each side conceding and countering. Vaughn, despite her initial resistance, began to see the value in a compromise that wouldn't just avoid backlash but could also position the project as a model for ethical development. Hensley, though reluctant, seemed eager to avoid further public outcry. By the end of the day, a tentative agreement had been drafted. The final terms, dubbed the Akron Accord, outlined a shared vision. The commercial district would be adjusted to leave key residential areas intact. Displaced residents would receive equitable compensation and first rights to new affordable housing built in the neighborhood. The wall and other cultural landmarks would be preserved as part of the redevelopment. LeBron's foundation and corporate sponsors would jointly fund community programs to ensure long-term benefits. As the meeting adjourned, there was no celebration, only the quiet hum of progress. Vaughn approached LeBron as the room began to empty. You're a tough negotiator, she said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I had good teachers, he replied, nodding toward Marcus and Maria, who were chatting with a city official nearby. Vaughn extended a hand. For what it's worth, I think this could work. And not just for PR. LeBron shook her hand, his grip firm. It has to. These people deserve better. As they left City Hall, the neighborhood representatives were greeted by a small crowd of supporters who had gathered outside. Marcus raised his fist, and cheers erupted. LeBron smiled, exhaustion etched into his features but a spark of hope lighting his eyes. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was a start. The community had a voice, a plan, and a promise that they wouldn't be forgotten. For now, the wall, and everything it represented, would stand. The summer sun shone brightly over Akron as the neighborhood bustled with life. The hum of construction had given way to laughter, music, and the rhythmic swish of paintbrushes against brick. A scaffold surrounded the wall, where dozens of residents worked together to breathe new life into their beloved mural. Children ran through the streets, their faces streaked with flecks of paint. Elders sat in folding chairs, watching the scene with smiles, their voices weaving stories of the past into the lively present. The air was heavy with the smell of fresh paint and barbecue from a grill set up nearby, tended by Marcus, who had taken charge of feeding the volunteers. LeBron stood in front of the wall, holding a paintbrush dipped in a brilliant shade of blue. He wore an old Akron hoodie, now dotted with paint splatters, blending seamlessly into the community that had raised him. "What do you think?" Maria asked, stepping beside him. Her son tugged at her hand, pointing to the section he had painted, a bright sun shining over a row of houses. "It's perfect," LeBron said, his voice thick with emotion. He glanced at the mural, now evolving into something new yet familiar. The original elements of the wall remained, the faces, the basketball court, the symbols of resilience. But now they were joined by fresh additions, images of construction workers and community members joining hands, depictions of children playing, and a large phoenix rising from the ashes, a symbol of rebirth. At the center of it all, a single word was scrawled in bold, vibrant letters. Together. Marcus approached, a plate of barbecue in one hand and a soda in the other. "You've got a steady hand for someone who's used to slam dunks," he teased. LeBron chuckled, wiping a streak of paint from his cheek. "Don't let the coaches hear that. They'll think I've gone soft." Marcus took a bite of his sandwich, nodding toward the mural. "It's more than just paint, you know. It's a reminder. For all of us." LeBron looked at him, his expression serious. "That's the point. They might have tried to take this away from us, but we're still here. Stronger than ever." The mural wasn't the only sign of change. Across the street, the shell of what had been a crumbling building was now a bright, inviting community center funded by the trust established through the Akron Accord. Small businesses were reopening, supported by grants and low-interest loans. The neighborhood buzzed with renewed purpose. As the day wore on, more people gathered around the wall, some to paint, others to watch, and many simply to be part of the moment. Vaughn appeared quietly at the edge of the crowd, her polished demeanor softened. She held a coffee in one hand and a cautious smile on her face. "Didn't think you'd show," Marcus said, crossing his arms as she approached. "I wanted to see it," she replied. "It's impressive." LeBron turned, noticing her. "This is what progress looks like when everyone's part of the picture," he said, gesturing toward the mural and the lively scene around it. Vaughn nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'll admit I didn't think it would work. But it's clear now, I was wrong." She extended her hand. "Good work, LeBron. All of you." He shook her hand, his grip firm but without animosity. "It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about doing what's right." The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the mural. Someone brought out a speaker, and music filled the air, setting the tone for an impromptu celebration. Children danced, elders clapped along, and the aroma of barbecue grew stronger. LeBron watched it all, a sense of fulfillment settling over him. It wasn't just the mural or the buildings that had changed, it was the people, the energy, the belief that they had a say in their own future. A small hand tugged at his sleeve, and he looked down to see Maria's son, holding out a paintbrush. "Can you help me paint the basketball court?" the boy asked shyly. "Of course," LeBron said, kneeling beside him. Together, they filled in the lines of the court with bright white paint, the boys' laughter echoing around them. As the sky turned from gold to deep purple, the mural was complete. The wall now stood as a symbol not just of resilience but of triumph, a testament to what could be achieved when a community refused to be silenced. Marcus stepped up to the microphone set up nearby, his voice booming over the crowd. "We've been through a lot," he said, his tone steady but full of emotion. "But we're still here. And this wall? This wall is more than just art. It's a promise, to ourselves, to our kids, and to everyone who thought they could take this from us. We're here to stay." Cheers erupted, the sound carrying into the night. LeBron stepped back, letting the moment belong to the people. He looked at the wall one last time, its vibrant colors glowing under the streetlights. As the celebration continued, he quietly slipped away, walking down the familiar streets. His heart was full, his mind at peace. Akron had won its fight, and its spirit was stronger than ever. And the wall? It stood tall, a beacon of hope for generations to come.